What we have here is one of our demo PRDGs, so not too big the setup, where we have almost every kind of the sensors we have in PRDG. And the first point of our agenda is email monitoring, mail server monitoring, and so let's get going with that one. Email is probably one of the most likely, or is most likely one of the most important communication tools nowadays. And so failures in your email sending and receiving capabilities may affect you, your employees, and of course, possibly also your customers. And so that's what you want to avoid. And that's why email monitoring is the first bit of our presentation today. Actually, we found that most of our customers use Exchange, Microsoft Exchange servers for their mail solution, and so we'll start with that one. We do have an Exchange server here as an example device, and so all the sensors you see here were actually added by the auto discovery, so very easy, just maybe let PRG run against the IP host name of your Exchange server, and PRG will actually do the work of discovering all the necessary sensors. So we'll of course have the basic sensors, CPU load here, memory, disk space, so that's basic stuff, but also important of course on an Exchange server. And then the next special Exchange monitoring part are all these here, MS, Exchange, and so on sensors. So they all rely on WMI actually, and they are very, very detailed here. So as I said, you don't need to add these manually. PRG will do that in the auto discovery, and we'll have, for example, just a few ones here. The Microsoft message queued for submission, so that's the mailbox here. This is actually displays the current number of submitted messages that are not yet processed by the transport. So messages submitted from clients like Microsoft Outlook or maybe Outlook Express to your mail server, and that are waiting to be sent out to their recipients outside of your organization. So actually here that's 0. So that's fine. Obviously that value should be as low as possible, 0 best of course, all the time. Another example, for example, messages submitted per second on the mailbox part as well. That indicates the rate that messages are submitted by clients. So again here that's the part of Outlook clients may be sending mails to your Exchange server. So we see a little bit of activity here. So that's not too much, and of course that probably will go higher. Sorry, we're on that one. But that probably will go higher if you have a lot of email activity in your organization. It's just a demo setup here, so it's not too much there. We also have the messages delivered for per second, for example, here. That's then the other way around. That's the number of messages delivered by the mail server, the Exchange server, to the clients in a delivery rate of messages per second. So obviously we'll have a little bit more receiving than actually sending going on here, but I think that's all fine. It's very steadily. Another example where we actually have a recommendation by Microsoft what the value should be is this one here, the RPC, average latency. This is what Microsoft writes in the MSDN. It's the average latency of RPC, remote procedure calls, in average for the last 1024 packets, and it should be, according to Microsoft, always less than 50 milliseconds on average. So the maximum value we have here is 15 milliseconds, so that should be fine. And we get asked every now and then, of course, what should I pay attention mostly on the sensor, and what would be a good threshold, and it's always hard for us to answer that because there are not many recommendations by Microsoft themselves, because they made up these counters with Exchange, and so and each Exchange server setup is very different actually. So if you're looking for a recommendation, the best thing really is to take the sensor name. It's derived from the performance counter or WMI class name, and just copy it and then throw it into Google. You will definitely end up with MSDN page where you see, okay, the active anonymous user count, for example, means that, and if there is a recommendation what a good threshold may be to be warned about, it should be written there in the MSDN article. Okay, but of course not everybody uses Exchange service, so we'll have a few more generic mail sensors there, namely the IMAP, POP3 and SMTP sensors. So let's maybe check into the IMAP for a second here, which actually are of course checking these set services, but they do more than just a port check. So the IMAP sensor really checks into the parent device's IMAP service. It is able to do authentication, of course. It actually is able to do a little bit more. We'll get into that a bit later on. So it's really more than just a port check. In addition to that, it's just the same with POP3. And also the SMTP sensor is able to do more than just checking if that service is there. Of course, we have authentication again, but you can also send an email. So from email address to email address, the topic and the body of the email can be specified. That might be actually a tool to do BlackBerry monitoring, if I'm correct. So where you have to send a mail with a topic or content, confirm, and then that device responds back. So you could do that with such a SMTP sensor here. Okay, well, that's the first part of email monitoring, but we'll want to take things one step further with what we call round-trip sensors. And the round-trip sensor is a sensor that will send out an email via a specified or a certain SMTP server and check then a specified inbox if the mail actually arrived there. And I want to take you through the process of adding such a sensor because it may not be the most trivial sensor we have in PureDG, and so that is a good opportunity to show what you have to do here. So we are looking at an Exchange server. It's called Exchanger here. So really the host name is Exchanger. It could be an IP address as well, or maybe a public SMTP server, smtp.gmail.com or something like that. So that's the first requirement we have a device that is an SMTP server. Then we'll go into adding such a round-trip sensor. So with 156 sensors, I'll use the search function here because that gets me quickly to the sensor I want. And so there we go. So we'll add a SMTP and POP3 round-trip sensor here for the example, and we'll have it sent from support@passler.com, so that's not too hard. And we'll use a Gmail address here, passlerroundtrip@gmail.com. The Halo ident will be Mergy, which is the name of the host machine here. Port SMTP, that's fine. We don't need authentication here, but in case you do, then add it and enter it here. We will need, of course, to check the mailbox. So that's then here pop.gmail.com. So that's a little typo there. So this is not related to the parent device the sensor sits to. So just add and enter the POP inbox or IMAP inbox that is supposed to be checked. Gmail requires port 995. We'll have to use TLS with Gmail, so enable it. And we'll have to supply username and host name, and we'll, for simplicity's sake, we'll copy that here. And the password again. So just a few explanations. The timeout for the SMTP connection is by default 300 seconds, so the sensor will give up trying to send the email if it can't for 5 minutes. And also again, the maximum trip time here is also 300 seconds. And altogether, the scanning interval should of course be higher or at least the same as the maximum trip time. So here it's 5 minutes. So you don't want to enter a maximum trip time of 600 seconds, for example. And that's about it. We'll just save it here. And there we have it. It will take a few minutes until it has sent the first email, then check the inbox. So we'll actually have that prepared here, like in any good show. And now you see I'm not cheating here. It's really the same support at Pestler.com, Pestler round trip. We'll check the same inbox there. And we'll see, obviously, as it's a local SMTP server, sending time is 225 milliseconds, so that's quick. And then checking time is about 6 seconds. So we'll have a total round trip time of almost 6 seconds, which I think is quite okay. So, and of course we see the historic data, and we could now check maybe in the 30 days graph here. We do have a few spikes here. It went up to 13 seconds, so double the time. If it would ramp up and always go higher, then of course you could see, is it maybe on the receiving sending side, and so on. You could actually expand that one more step by adding a autoresponder in the Gmail inbox, which then forwards the email back to your Exchange or mail server, and then check the local box again. And that way you would check or monitor sending and receiving emails. In this example, we'll just do the sending part, but with an autoresponder, you could do both. One final word of caution for these round trip sensors: please use dedicated mailboxes for these sensors. So like we did here with Pestler round trip at gmail.com, use something like that, not an inbox that's also used for an administrator's normal email daily business. Otherwise that might have an impact on the performance of these sensors. Okay.